At a family dinner, my sister laughed and said, "She's the loser of our family." The words hung in the air like a cold, jagged knife. I froze mid-chew, the silver fork clattering onto my plate. My father's smile stretched politely, the kind that never reached his eyes, and I felt that familiar burn of invisibility. Around the table, my mother's lips twitched in quiet amusement. Then, a voice sliced through the tension. My father's biggest client, Mr. Hargrove, stood abruptly, clearing his throat. "Funny," he said, his gaze sliding to me, "because she is the director who owns your company." The room fell into a stunned silence. My sister's laughter choked and died on her lips, her smug certainty evaporating instantly. I felt the slow, creeping pulse of vindication settle in my chest, quiet, controlled, but utterly undeniable. Tonight, the balance had begun to shift. I am Elise Carmichael, 28. The girl my family always overlooked, the one they whispered about at parties, the quiet one who would never amount to anything. I grew up in the shadow of my sister, Clara, loud, confident, effortless, the golden child my parents adored. I learned early that silence was safer than speaking up, that smiles could mask fury, and that patience could be sharper than any scream. School, college, even the first years of my career, everyone underestimated me. Teachers, colleagues, family. They laughed when I said I wanted to start a business. They doubted me when I bought my first property. My father would pat my shoulder and say, "Don't overreach, Elise. Be realistic." Every word of dismissal was a brick in the wall I quietly built around myself, a fortress of skill, strategy, and quiet ambition. They never saw the nights I worked alone, the endless plans etched in notebooks, the deals I made behind the scenes. They never knew I was already moving, silently, toward something far bigger than their approval. And yet, every insult, every smirk, every whispered judgment was fuel. It was a reminder of what they had never recognized: my worth. By the time I had taken control of the company, none of them suspected a thing. Clara's laughter at dinner was predictable, too blind to realize that I was no longer the girl they thought I was. Tonight, that ignorance would cost them. Dinner continued, but the air was thick with a new tension, invisible but undeniable. Clara kept flicking her hair, throwing me sideways glances that tried to reclaim dominance. My father, still smiling, spoke over me whenever I offered input, as if my voice was background noise. Each sentence I said was met with polite nods, barely masking impatience. My mother's fork scraped the plate with exaggerated precision every time I reached for a dish. I noticed every detail. The way Clara's laugh no longer bounced freely, replaced by nervous glances toward Mr. Hargrove. The subtle shift in my father's posture when I met his eye, just long enough to remind him who I had become. I sipped my wine, calm, letting the heat of their unspoken judgment brush against me without reaction. Each micro-insult, the accidental elbow, the faint sigh when I spoke, the dismissive tone, was recorded in my mind like data points on a chart. And I waited. I let Clara's smirk hang in the air, allowed her small victories to make her overconfident. Every moment she believed she had the upper hand, I strengthened my quiet control. The room was mine to read, their arrogance, their impatience, their belief that nothing had changed. And with each glance, each subtle mockery, I smiled inside. They had mistaken my calm for weakness. They had no idea the storm had already been planned. Tonight, patience was my weapon, and they were already disarmed. I watched Clara lift her glass again, smiling at my father as if she owned the room. That's when something inside me shifted. The quiet, measured patience I'd carried for years hardened into resolve. Enough. Every slight, every laugh, every dismissive glance had been catalogued, every underestimation noted. I no longer wanted to be invisible. I wanted them to see, truly see, the woman they had always ignored. I leaned back, letting the wine swirl in my glass, and studied the room. Mr. Hargrove's gaze flicked to me, sharp and calculating. The recognition in his eyes was subtle, but unmistakable. This was my turning point. I had built my empire quietly, invisibly, and now, here it was, tangible, undeniable, right under their noses. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. My calm was sharper than any argument, my presence more potent than any outburst. The realization settled in with a strange serenity. Power doesn't scream. It waits. It observes. It strikes quietly, and when it does, it leaves no doubt. Tonight, I would no longer be the loser of my family. Tonight, I would become the reckoning. I didn't improvise. I never had. Everything I did was backed by paperwork, clauses, and signatures collected months before this dinner ever happened. While my family dismissed me, I had completed my MBA quietly, specialized in corporate restructuring, and bought controlling shares through a holding company that didn't carry my name. Clean. Legal. Invisible. The company my father ran so proudly wasn't really his anymore. It hadn't been for a while. I had studied the contracts he skimmed, the partnerships he trusted too easily. I knew exactly where influence lived, not in titles, but in ownership. As dessert was served, I checked my phone once. A confirmation email. Final transfer approved. No drama. No confrontation. Just completion. Mr. Hargrove wasn't there by coincidence. He was there because I'd asked him to be. Because directors answer to owners, not egos. Because respect follows leverage. I folded my napkin neatly and placed it on the table, my pulse steady. This wasn't revenge fueled by anger. It was correction. Balance. A quiet realignment of truth. They had spent years believing I was beneath them. I had spent those same years preparing to step above them. Not loudly, not cruelly, but permanently. The plan was already in motion. All that remained was letting them discover it. The check arrived, and my father reached for it out of habit. Mr. Hargrove stopped him with a gentle hand. "Allow me," he said, his voice calm, professional. Then he turned to me. "Actually, Director Carmichael should approve this. Company policy." The word director landed heavily. My father's hand froze mid-air. Clara's eyes flicked between us, searching for a joke that never came. The room seemed to contract, the clink of cutlery, the low hum of the restaurant, all suddenly too loud. I met my father's gaze, not with triumph, but with composure. "We'll expense it under client relations," I said evenly. The sentence was ordinary. That was the point. Power sounds boring when it's real. Mr. Hargrove nodded once, satisfied. The waiter smiled politely, already adjusting his posture toward me. No accusations. No speeches. Just a quiet shift in gravity. My mother stared at her plate. Clara's mouth opened, then closed. For the first time in my life, no one interrupted me. As we stood to leave, my father lingered, uncertain, smaller somehow. Consequences didn't explode. They settled. And in that stillness, I felt something I'd never been allowed before. Recognition. The drive home was silent. Clara's usual commentary, her teasing jabs, had evaporated into awkward glances out the window. My father hadn't spoken once, and my mother's hand rested tensely in her lap, as if she weren't sure how to hold herself around me. I didn't break the quiet. I didn't need to. By the time we reached the house, the shift was undeniable. Their perception of me had fractured, replaced by something uncertain, respect, fear, maybe guilt. I caught my reflection in the hallway mirror. Calm, composed, untouched by their shock. For years, I had been overlooked, underestimated, dismissed. Tonight, all of that had changed. I thought of my own worth, long ignored, quietly proven through years of planning, sacrifice, and patience. I realized how much of life I had spent proving myself to people who never truly saw me. Now, they had no choice. The truth was visible, in every glance, every hesitation. And yet, the victory wasn't bitter. It was quiet. Measured. Cinematic in its simplicity. They would remember this evening forever, not because of a spectacle, but because reality had corrected itself, slowly, inexorably, and irrevocably. Tonight, they saw me. And that was everything. Weeks passed, but the ripple of that dinner lingered. My family adjusted to the new reality. My presence no longer invisible, my voice no longer ignored. Clara avoided unnecessary smirks, my father paused before speaking, and even my mother measured her words with a new respect. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. Victory doesn't require noise. It requires patience, preparation, and quiet confidence. I felt a strange, unfamiliar peace, not just from winning, but from knowing I had claimed my space without losing myself in anger or spectacle. The company continued to thrive, my name attached to every success quietly, efficiently, unassailably. And in that calm control, I found satisfaction deeper than any applause could give. I had proven, first to myself, that I was capable of patience, strategy, and resilience. One evening, I sat on the porch with a glass of wine, watching the sunset spill gold across the city skyline. I thought of the past, of laughter at my expense, of dismissals and underestimations, and smiled, softly, without bitterness. They had called me the loser. They had been wrong. I had learned the quiet power of watching, waiting, and moving unseen. And now, I was unstoppable,